Hey guys, XH here. Today we're going to be taking an in-depth look at Valkyr, the Angry Cat warframe. If you just want to look at the build, that's coming right up. But if you want to know everything about Valkyr and master her to conquer the steel path, make sure to watch the entire video because I'll teach you everything you need to know. Let's get started. You'll see that it's very focused on strength, with a slight increase in duration, but a slight hit to efficiency. We've slotted an Archon Vitality to double heat procs from our Exalted weapon, and then we have the Eternal War Element, which boosts Warcry indefinitely as long as you keep killing stuff. And for the arcane choices, we're going to use Arcane Battery instead of the typical Prime Flow, because while Valkyr has a very low natural energy pool, she has a very high natural armor pool, so we get a lot more value out of slotting Arcane Battery than we would Prime Flow. And then we have Arcane Energize to help us sustain our high energy pool. If we didn't, we'd probably struggle a bit to keep this topped up, but with Arcane Energize and Arcane Battery, we've solved all our issues with sustaining the Hysteria, as well as other abilities. Now let's look at our talents. You'll see that this is a melee influence build, however, there isn't actually electricity. So you'll wonder, how do we proc this? For our Valkyr build, we're going to slot in 5 Tall Forge Violet Archon shards, and they're all going to be slotted on melee critical damage. And now you'll see why it was so important to us to have Arcane Battery, because this puts her energy pool over the threshold to receive double the bonus from each of these shards. For the helmet, this is technically optional, but I would recommend putting Roar over Paralysis. This is her worst ability, and this will greatly buff our damage from our talents as well as the heat procs that we're spreading with melee influence. Alright, now is the good part of the video. So I'm gonna let you guys in on a little secret. You can actually trigger melee influence using not your weapon itself, but using electric procs from your companion. So candidate 1 is the Diriga with this loadout, and using Arc Coil, when it shocks enemies and processes electricity on them, it will have a chance to trigger your melee influence, allowing you to basically have melee influence with any elemental combination you want. And then for the weapon, this doesn't really matter because we're not using the Sentinel for anything besides proccing melee influence, but this is how I would build the weapon for this build. You can also use the Hound, and this is my build for the Hound. And the mod responsible for proccing melee influence is Synergist Practice. You'll see that also deals electric damage. And then for the weapon, I used this weapon, and here's the build. Now for the rest of the loadout, so we're gonna be pretty much always using her talons, so the rest of the build is just stuff to support that. And for slot 1, we have the Ralta. This is a gun where when you hit enemies with the shots, it increases your combo count. And this synergizes it with Valkyr really well because you want to be at 12 times combo count, but we also want to use Modernized Void Strike, reviving ourselves if we go down somehow. So if we do lose our combo counter, then we can easily get it back in a few hits by shooting enemies with the Ralta. We also slot in primary dexterity for an extra 7.5 per second combo duration, which will help us sustain our combo counter even more easily. For our secondary weapon, we're going to be using the Grimoire, and this will boost our ability strength. And it stacks up to 60%. This can also act as a mini primer with electric, magnetic, and viral procs, as well as getting us some overguard. And then for the melee itself, so this one, you're not actually going to be using it for most cases, but if for some reason you did want to use this, then this is my Burning Hate melee influence build. You'll notice again, we don't have electricity on it, but that's no problem because with this build, we have it from the companion, which will allow us to proc the Hate's melee influence and spread these heat procs, synergizing with the Burning Hate element. Normally, you couldn't do this kind of build because Burning Hate demands you have heat, but melee influence demands electric, so this is one way you could take full advantage of the Burning Hate build. And the Riven is critical damage and attack speed, but you can replace this with either one of those stats. Alright, for this section, we're going to be taking a look at our abilities. So our first ability is the Rip Line, and you cast this and it pulls you towards the targeted point. This can be increased by your range stat, however I feel like the default range is sufficient for most tile sets. And one thing some people don't know is that when you use it on an enemy, it pulls you to them and also does an attack. So this can be effective for instantly killing light to medium units. And for those enemies that are not killed by this, it'll group them together and you can easily dispose of them. For our second ability, Warframe, you cast this and it gives you a huge attack speed and armor buff. And you'll see that after casting this, we got enough armor to get to 1000 energy. And now if we use the Grimoire's strength buff, and then reset our Warcry, we get to almost 1100 energy. Okay, for the third ability, we've Helmet on Roar. This is just a straight up damage buff. Extremely effective for damage over time effects like heat, electricity, and slash. And for her ultimate ability, we have Hysteria. And when you activate this, you'll see that you grab her claws and then you can use them to dispose of enemies. You also gain her meter on the right, which you'll see you get bonus damage in this mode while killing enemies. And if you go down, you'll reset that meter to halfway, and then let me show you. So you see, when I hit enemies, I get that meter filled up, and then okay, well, they're kind of not shooting me because my companion's so good at CCing them. So you'll see, let me down purpose here. You'll see, instead of dying, we reset the meter, and then after hitting enemies, we got the meter back. So with this build, we're very good at killing object enemies, so you'll basically never run out of that meter. Alright guys, so we're in a mission and you'll see I am not crazy. We did trigger melee influence with the Jirga, so it does work. I'm not making shit up, I promise. Must be a simulacrum bug. You'll see we're spreading the heat procs. Definitely works. And now we activated the Valkyr immunity, so you don't even need to be in Hysteria mode. You can just use the Burning Hate build with this if you want, but that's not Valkyr. Let's go into Valkyr mode. We activated Hysteria and Warcry, and now we're just churning through the enemies. You want a little bit more combo counter? Well, let's pull out the Rata. I'm gonna shoot them with the pellets. Now we have max combo count with barely an effort. You'll see at max combo count with the help of Blood Rush, we're dealing pretty much consistent red crits, which lets us make full benefit of the 5 Violet Top 4 shards that we're using on this build. And then we roar to do more damage. The only issue is this build hits a little too hard, so when you one-shot enemies with the melee, you don't actually spread procs. They have to survive the initial hit to spread procs. That's the only downside really to this build, that you hit too hard and you might not always get those nice magnificent spreads. However, once the levels get a bit higher and the enemy armor gets higher, then you'll be able to see those nice heat proc splashes and then everything dies on 1 or 2 ticks. And then Ripline lets you latch on enemies and group them. But yeah, this build is extremely fun, easy to play. You have high armor plus the immunity for 5 seconds from the Hysteria meter, and then you just basically go around and hit stuff with your melee. You see we got a nice melee defense proc there. And then if you get bored, you can also do silly stuff like this. You can just slingshot around like Spider-Man. Boom. Look at that. Awesome rip line.